the elephant's child. In the high and far off times, the elephant, O best beloved, had no trunk. He only had a blackish, bulgy nose, as big as a boot that he could wiggle about from side to side, but he couldn't pick things up with it. But there was one elephant, a new elephant, an elephant's child, that was full of insatiable curiosity. And that means he asked ever so many questions. And he lived in Africa, and he filled all of Africa with insatiable curiosities. He asked his tall aunt, the ostrich, why her tail feathers grew just so, and his tall aunt, the ostrich, spanked her with her hard, hard claw. He asked his tall aunt, the giraffe, what made his skin spotty, and his tall aunt, the giraffe, spanked him with his hard, hard hoof. And still, he is full of insatiable curiosity. He asked his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, why her eyes were red, and his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, spanked him with her broad, broad hoof. And he asked his hairy uncle, the baboon, why melons tasted just so, and his hairy uncle, the baboon, spanked him with his hairy, hairy paw. And still, he is full of insatiable curiosity. He asked questions about everything that he saw, or heard, or felt, or smelt, or touched, and all his uncles and aunts spanked him, and still he is full of insatiable curiosity. One fine morning, in the middle of the procession of the equinoxes, this insatiable elephant's child asked a fine new question he'd never asked before. He asked, what does the crocodile have for dinner? Then everybody said, hush, in a loud and dreadful tone, and they spanked him very hard and immediately and directly without stopping for a very long time. By and by, when that was finished, he came upon the Kolo bird. Okay? Sitting in the middle of a wait-a-bit thorn bush, and he said, my father has spanked me, and my mother has spanked me, and all my aunts and uncles have spanked me for my insatiable curiosity, and still I want to know what the crocodile has for dinner. Then the Kolo bird said with a mournful cry, go to the banks of the great, gray, green, greasy Limpopo River. All set about with fever trees and find out. The very next morning, when there was nothing left of the equinoxes because the procession had proceeded according to precedent, this insatiable elephant's child took 100 pounds of bananas, the short little red kind, and 100 pounds of sugar cane, the long purpley kind, and 17 melons, the green crackly kind, and said to all of his dear families, goodbye, I'm going to the great, gray, green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, to find out what the crocodile has for dinner. And they all spanked him one more time for good luck, though they asked him most politely not to stop. Then he went away, a little warm but not at all astonished, eating melons and throwing the rinds about because he couldn't pick it up. He went from Grahamstown to Kimberley, and from Kimberley, Kama's country, and from Kama's country went north by east, eating melons all the time, until at last he came to the banks of the great, gray, green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, precisely as the Kolo bird had said. Now you must know and understand, O best beloved, that till that very day and week, and hour and minute, that this insatiable elephant's child had never seen a crocodile, and they did not know what it was like. It was all his insatiable curiosity. The first thing he found was a bicolored python rock snake, all curled around a rock. Excuse me, said the elephant's child, most politely, but have you seen such a thing as a crocodile in these promiscuous parts? Have I seen a crocodile, said the bicolored python rock snake, in a voice of dreadful scorn. What will you ask me next? Oh, excuse me, said the elephant's child, but could you kindly tell me what he has for dinner? Then the bicolored python rock snake uncoiled himself very quickly from the rock and spanked the elephant's child with his scalesome, flailsome tail. Oh, that is odd, said the elephant's child, because my father and my mother and my uncle and my aunt, not to mention my other aunt, the hippopotamus, and my other uncle, the baboon, have all spanked me for my insatiable curiosity. And I suppose this is the same thing. Okay? So he said goodbye very politely to the bicolored python rock snake and helped to coil himself up on the rock again and went on a little warm but not at all astonished, eating melons and throwing the rind about because he could not pick it up till he trod on what he thought was a log of wood at the very edge of the great, gray, green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees. You are the very... But it was really the crocodile, O best beloved, and the crocodile winked one eye, just like this. Oh, excuse me, said the elephant's child most politely, but do you happen to have seen a crocodile in these promiscuous parts? Then the crocodile winked the other eye and lifted half his tail out of the mud, and the elephant's child stepped back most politely because he did not wish to be spanked again. Come hither, little one, said the crocodile. Why do you ask such things? Excuse me, said the elephant's child. most politely, but my father spanked me and my mother spanked me. Not to mention my tall aunt, the ostrich, my tall uncle, the giraffe, who can kick ever so hard, as well as my broad aunt, the hippopotamus, and my hairy uncle, the baboon, and the bicolor python rock snake, with a scale, some flail, some tail, just up the bank, who spanks harder than any of them. And so if it's quite all the same to you, I do not want to be spanked anymore. Come hither, little one, said the crocodile, for I am the crocodile. And he wept great big crocodile tears just to show that it was quite true. Then the elephant's child grew all breathless and panted and knelt down on the bank and said, "Oh, you're the very person I've been looking for all these long days. Will you please tell me what you have for dinner?" "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile, "and I'll whisper." Okay. Then the elephant's child put his head down close to the crocodile's musky, tusky mouth, and the crocodile caught him by his little nose, which up to that very week, day, hour, and minute had been no bigger than a boot, though much more useful. "I think," said the crocodile, and he said it like this between his teeth, "I think that today I'll begin with elephant's child." At this, O best beloved, the elephant's child was much annoyed, and he said, speaking through his nose like this, "Let go, you hurted me." Then the bicolor python rock snake scuffled down from the bank and said, "My young friend, if you do not now immediately and instantly pull as hard as you ever can, it is my opinion that your acquaintance in a large pattern leather ulster," and by this he meant the crocodile, "will jerk you into yonder limpid stream before you can say Jack Robinson." This is the way all bicolor python rock snake always talk. Then the elephant's child sat back on his little haunches and pulled and pulled and pulled, and his nose began to stretch, and the crocodile floundered in the water, making it all creamy with great sweeps of his trail, and he pulled and pulled and pulled. And the elephant's child, his nose kept on stretching, and the elephant's child spread all of his four legs and pulled and pulled and pulled and pulled, and his nose kept on stretching, and the crocodile threshed his tail like an oar, and he pulled and pulled and pulled, and at each pull the elephant's child's nose grew longer, and it hurt him. Then the elephant's child felt his leg slipping, and he said through his nose, which is now nearly 5 feet long, "This is too much for me." Then the bicolor python rock snake came down from the bank and knotted himself in a double clove hitch around the elephant's child's hind legs and said, "Rash and inexperienced traveler, we'll now seriously devote ourselves to a little high tension, because if we do not, it is my impression that yonder self-propelling man of war with the armor-plated upper deck," and by this, O best beloved, he meant the crocodile, "will vitiate your future career." That is the way all bicolor python rock snakes always talk. So he pulled, and the elephant's child pulled, and the crocodile pulled, but the elephant's child and the bicolor python rock snake, they pulled the hardest. And at last, the crocodile let go of the elephant's child's nose with a plop that you could hear all up and down the great greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees. Then the elephant's child sat down most hard and sudden. But first he was careful to say thank you to the bicolor python rock snake. And next he was kind to his poor nose and wrapped it all up in cool banana leaves and hung it in the great gray green greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, to cool off. "What are you doing that for?" said the bicolor python rock snake. "Oh, excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but my nose is badly out of shape and I'm waiting for it to shrink." "Then you'll have to wait a long time," said the bicolor python rock snake. "Some people do not know what's good for them." The elephant's child sat there for 3 days waiting for his nose to shrink, but it never grew any shorter, and besides it made him squint. For, O best beloved, you will see and understand that the crocodile pulled it out into a really truly trunk, the same as all elephants have today. At the end of the 3rd day, a fly came and stung him on the shoulder, and before he knew what he was doing, he lifted up his trunk and hit that fly dead with the end of it. "Vantage number 1, said the bicolor python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose. Try and eat a little now." Before he thought what he was doing, the elephant's child pulled out his trunk and plucked up a large bundle of grass, dusted it clean against his forelegs, and stuffed it into his own mouth. "Vantage number 2, said the bicolor python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose." "Don't you think the sun is very hot here?" "Oh, it is," said the elephant's child, and before he thought what he was doing, he scooped up a sloop of mud from the banks of the great gray green greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, and slapped it on his head, where it made a cool, sloopy, sloshy mud cap all trickly behind his ears. "Vantage number 3, said the bicolor python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose. Now, how do you feel about being spanked again?" Oh, excuse me, said the elephant's child, but I should not like it at all. How would you like to spank somebody else? Said the bicolored python rock snake. Oh, I should like it very much indeed, said the elephant's child. Well, said the bicolored python rock snake, you will find that new nose of yours very useful to spank people with. Oh, thank you, said the elephant's child. I'll remember that. And now I think I'll go home to my dear families and try. So the elephant's child went home across Africa, frisking and whisking his trunk. When he wanted fruit to eat, he pulled fruit down from a tree instead of waiting for it to fall as he used to do. When he wanted grass, he plucked grass up from the ground instead of going down on his knees as he used to do. When the flies bit him, he broke off the branch of a tree and used it as a fly whisk, and he made himself a new, cool, slushy, squishy mud camp when the sun was hot. When he felt lonely walking through Africa, he sang to himself down his trunk, and the noise was louder than several brass bands. He went specially out of his way to find the broad hippopotamus. She was no friend of his, and he spanked her very hard to make sure that the bicolored python rock snake was telling the truth about his new trunk. The rest of the time he picked up melon rinds that he dropped on his way to the Limpopo, for he was a tidy pachyderm. One dark evening he came back to all his dear families, and he coiled up his trunk and said, "How do you do?" They were very glad to see him and said immediately, "Come here and be spanked for your insatiable curiosity." "Oh, pooh," said the elephant's child. "I don't think you people know anything about spanking, but I do, and I'll show you." Then he uncurled his trunk and knocked two of his dear brothers head over heels. "Oh, bananas," they said, "where did you learn that trick, and what have you done to your nose?" "Oh, I got a new one from the crocodile on the banks of the great gray green greasy Limpopo River," said the elephant's child. "I asked him what he had for dinner, and he gave me this to keep." "It looks very ugly," said his hairy uncle the baboon. "Oh, it does indeed," said the elephant's child, "but it's very useful." And he picked up his hairy uncle the baboon by one hairy leg and shoved him into a hornet's nest. Then that bad elephant's child spanked all his dear families for a long time till they were very warm and greatly astonished. He pulled out his tall ostrich ant's tail feathers, and he caught his tall uncle the giraffe by the hind leg and threw him into a thorn bush, and then he shouted at his broad aunt the hippopotamus and blew bubbles into her ear when she was sleeping in the water after meals, but he never let anyone touch the colo bird. Okay. At last, things grew so exciting that his dear families went off one by one in a hurry to the banks of the great gray green greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, to borrow new noses from the crocodile. When they came back, nobody spanked anybody anymore, and ever since that day, oh best beloved, all the elephants you'll ever see, besides all the ones you won't, have trunks precisely like the trunk of the insatiable elephant's child.